The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Colorado, in 1875. As Clara Kennedy clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the weight of her husband's betrayal heavier than the small bag of belongings in her trembling hand. The sound of boisterous laughter and piano music spilled from the saloon behind her, a stark contrast to the tears streaming silently down her face. Her husband of 3 years, Robert Kennedy, had just sold her to the highest bidder like she was nothing more than livestock at an auction, all to cover gambling debts that had been mounting for months. Clara had been 21 when she married Robert, believing his promises of a better life away from her family's struggling farm. At 24, she now stood alone, waiting to be claimed by the stranger who had purchased her for $200 and a prized stallion. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the saloon doors swung open behind her, and heavy footsteps approached. "Mrs. Kennedy." A deep voice called, and Clara turned, her chin raised despite her fear. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Isaac Tucker was known throughout the territory as a skilled rancher and a fair businessman, but Clara knew little else about the man who now apparently owned her. "Mr. Tucker," she acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I reckon you're wondering why I'm here," he said, stepping closer. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust in the fading light. "I heard what happened in there." Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation. "Then you know I belong to you now," she replied bitterly. The cowboy's expression softened, surprising her. "No, madam, you don't belong to anyone. I'm buying your freedom, not you." Clara blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "I have no intention of owning another human being," Isaac explained, his voice firm but gentle. "What your husband did was despicable. I only bid to ensure you wouldn't fall into worse hands." Hope flickered within Clara like a fragile flame, but she quickly tamped it down. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Isaac replied, removing his hat and revealing kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I know that no person deserves to be treated as property. The way I see it, you're free to go wherever you please." Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief, but reality quickly reasserted itself. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "Robert gambled away everything we had. Our home, our savings. Everything." Isaac considered her words for a moment. "I could use help at my ranch," he offered. "The housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing mother. It's honest work with fair pay, and you'd have your own quarters. At least until you decide what you want to do next." Clara studied the man before her, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Tucker." "Isaac," he corrected with a small smile. "And it's not kindness, Mrs. Kennedy. It's basic human decency." "Clara," she replied, offering her own name in return. As Isaac led her to his wagon at the edge of town, Clara cast one last glance at the saloon where her former life had ended. The night air carried a promise of change as they rode away from Willow Creek, the stars beginning to emerge overhead like distant beacons of hope. The Tucker Ranch lay 10 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley with rolling hills that stretched toward the distant mountains. In the darkness, Clara could make out the silhouette of a large 2-story house and several outbuildings. As they approached, a dog began to bark, announcing their arrival. "That's Rusty," Isaac explained as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "He sounds fierce, but he's gentle as a lamb once he knows your friend, not foe." A large brown dog bounded toward them, circling excitedly around Isaac's legs before cautiously approaching Clara. She extended her hand, allowing the dog to sniff her before gently petting his head. "He likes you," Isaac observed. "That's a good sign." Clara managed a small smile, her first of the evening. I've always been good with animals. Isaac carried her small bag as he led her toward the house. I'll show you to your room. You must be exhausted. The inside of the house was tidy and well kept, with simple but comfortable furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, and kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over polished wooden floors. Isaac showed her to a bedroom at the back of the house, with a window overlooking a small garden. The previous housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, kept this room, he explained. Bathrooms down the hall. There's clean linens in the chest, and I'll bring you some water to wash up. Clara stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Mr. Tucker, Isaac, I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks, he replied, setting her bag on the bed. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. After Isaac left, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her in waves. Tears came again, but these were different tears of relief mixed with uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring. She unpacked her meager belongings. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small photograph of her parents, both now deceased. As she prepared for bed, Clara caught her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. Her brown hair had come loose from its pins, and her green eyes were rimmed with red from crying. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her, a woman who had been sold like property by the man who had vowed to cherish her until death. Sleep came fitfully, with dreams of Robert's cruel laughter and the leering faces of men bidding for her as if she were a prized mare. But each time she woke, the unfamiliar comfort of the bed and the distant sounds of the ranch, a horse nickering, the gentle hoot of an owl reminded her that she had escaped. For now, at least, she was safe. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains. Clara rose and dressed in her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days. She pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck and ventured out to find Isaac. The kitchen was empty, but a pot of coffee sat warm on the stove. Clara found a cup in a cabinet and poured herself some, savoring the rich aroma. Through the window, she could see Isaac in the corral, working with a young chestnut horse. His movements were patient and sure as he guided the animal in a circle, speaking words she couldn't hear. Clara opened the back door and stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding hills and the earthy smells of the ranch. She watched as Isaac completed his work with the horse, patting its neck before securing it to a hitching post. He spotted her as he turned toward the house, raising a hand in greeting. "Good morning," he called, approaching the porch. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Clara replied honestly. "The coffee is good. One of the few things I can manage in a kitchen," Isaac admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Mrs. Collins tried to teach me, but I'm a lost cause when it comes to cooking." Clara found herself returning his smile. "Perhaps I can help with that. I'm a fair cook." "That would be mighty appreciated," Isaac said, removing his hat and wiping his brow with his sleeve. "I've been living on beans and biscuits for weeks now." "Well, we can't have that," Clara replied, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time since arriving. "If you'll show me what supplies you have, I can make us a proper breakfast." Inside, Clara discovered a well-stocked pantry: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans and fruit, canned goods, and a crate of eggs. Fresh milk sat in a ceramic crock in the icebox, along with butter and a side of bacon. "You certainly don't lack for provisions," she remarked as she gathered ingredients. "The ranch does well enough," Isaac replied, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "I raise cattle primarily, but I've got some crops and chickens too. Try to be self-sufficient when I can." Clara set to work frying bacon, mixing batter for hotcakes, and brewing fresh coffee. As she moved around the kitchen, she felt Isaac's eyes on her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but rather with quiet appreciation. "May I ask you something?" she said as she flipped a hotcake with practiced ease. "Of course. Why were you at the saloon last night?" Clara kept her eyes on her task, not wanting to appear accusatory but genuinely curious. Isaac was quiet for a moment. "I was meeting with a cattle buyer from Denver. We'd just finished our business when your husband came in, looking for someone to stake him in a poker game." His voice hardened slightly. "When that didn't work," he offered. "Well, you know what happened next." Clara nodded, sliding the hotcakes onto a plate. "And you just decided to intervene?" "I couldn't stand by and watch," Isaac said simply. "No decent man could." They ate breakfast together, and Clara found herself sharing more of her story, how she'd met Robert when he came through her small hometown near Denver, how his charm had won her heart, and how his true nature had emerged after they were married. "He wasn't always cruel," she explained, staring into her coffee cup. "But the drinking and the gambling got worse. When he lost, he'd blame me for his bad luck. Said I was a curse." Isaac's jaw tightened. "No man worth his salt blames others for his own failings." "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go after my parents died," Clara admitted. "And because I kept hoping he'd change back into the man I thought I married." "Hope can be both a blessing and a burden," Isaac observed softly. After breakfast, Isaac showed Clara around the ranch. The main house was larger than it had appeared in the darkness, with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a study, the kitchen, and a spacious main room downstairs. Behind the house was a vegetable garden, neglected but salvageable, and a chicken coop with a dozen hens scratching in the dirt. The barn housed 6 horses, including Isaac's prize stallion, Thunderbolt, and the mare he'd been working with that morning. 2 milk cows occupied stalls at the far end. Beyond the immediate buildings spread pastureland where a herd of cattle grazed under the watchful eye of a young cowhand. "That's Jimmy," Isaac explained, nodding toward the rider. "He's been with me 3 years now. Good worker, though still green in some ways. There's also Thomas, who's been my foreman since I bought this place, and Elijah, who helps with the cattle and repairs. They've got cabins on the west side of the property." Clara took it all in, impressed by the orderliness of the operation. "It's a beautiful place," she said sincerely. "It's home," Isaac replied with obvious pride. 6 years of hard work, but worth every drop of sweat. As they walked back toward the house, Clara's thoughts turned to practical matters. "I should probably discuss my duties and wages," she said, "so I understand what's expected." Isaac nodded. Mrs. Collins kept the house clean, did the cooking, laundry, and helped with the garden. The men take their midday meal in the bunkhouse, but breakfast and supper are served in the main house. As for wages, I paid her $20 a month, plus room and board. "Would that be acceptable to you?" Clara nearly stumbled in surprise. $20 was far more than she had expected. Robert had never allowed her to have money of her own, claiming that a wife had no need for independent funds. "That's very generous," she managed to say. "It's fair pay for honest work," Isaac corrected. "You'll have Sundays free, of course, and I can take you into town when you need supplies or, well, whatever else you might need." The implication was clear. She was free to leave whenever she wished. The knowledge was both comforting and overwhelming. For now, Clara was grateful for the sanctuary and the chance to rebuild her life, one day at a time. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that Clara found unexpectedly comforting. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Isaac and any of the ranch hands who might be joining them. The days were filled with cleaning, cooking, tending to the garden she had revitalized, and occasionally helping with lighter ranch chores. Isaac was a fair employer, never demanding or critical. He seemed genuinely appreciative of her efforts to make the house a home again, commenting on the fresh curtains she'd sewn from fabric found in a trunk in the attic, or the wildflowers she'd arranged on the dining table. They often shared supper together, their conversations growing easier and more companionable with each passing day. Clara learned that Isaac had come west from Missouri after the war, using money saved from his army pay to purchase land that others had deemed too difficult to farm. Through determination and hard work, he'd turned it into one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. "My pa always said I was too stubborn for my own good," Isaac told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Guess that stubbornness finally paid off." "It's not stubbornness," Clara countered. "It's perseverance. There's a difference." Isaac smiled at that. "What about you? What did you dream of before?" "Before I made the mistake of marrying Robert?" Clara finished when he trailed off. She considered the question, realizing it had been years since she'd allowed herself to dream of anything beyond survival. "I used to think I might become a teacher. I've always loved books and learning." "You still could," Isaac suggested. "Willow Creek's growing. They might need another teacher soon." The idea planted a seed of possibility in Clara's mind, though she knew there would be obstacles. A divorced woman for surely Robert would divorce her now would face scrutiny as a teacher. Still, the thought that she might have choices ahead of her was emboldening. One afternoon, as Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she spotted a familiar figure riding up the path toward the ranch. Her blood ran cold as she recognized Robert's slouched posture in the saddle. Instinctively, she stepped back toward the house, her heart racing. "Clara!" Robert's voice carried across the yard, slurred even at this distance. He was drunk, as he often was by midday. "Where are you hiding, woman?" Before she could retreat inside, Isaac emerged from the barn, walking purposefully to intercept Robert before he could reach the house. "Kennedy," Isaac greeted coldly, his hand resting near the pistol on his hip. "You're trespassing on my property." Robert swayed in the saddle, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Come to get what's mine," he declared. "My wife. Heard you've been keeping her here." "Mrs. Kennedy works for me as my housekeeper," Isaac replied evenly. "And as I recall, you forfeited any claim to her when you offered her up as payment for your gambling debts." Robert spat on the ground. "That was just business. She's still my wife under the law." "Not for long," Clara called out, finding her courage and stepping forward. "I've spoken to Judge Wallace. He's agreed to grant me a divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty." It was true. The previous Sunday, Isaac had taken her into town where she'd met with the county judge, a stern but fair man who had listened to her story with growing disgust. The divorce proceedings had been initiated, though it would take time for them to be finalized. Robert's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore. After everything I did for you." "That's enough," Isaac cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "You'll not speak to her that way. Now turn your horse around and leave my property, or I'll have my men escort you off and they won't be gentle about it." As if summoned by his words, Thomas and Elijah appeared, both armed and clearly willing to enforce their employer's command. Robert looked from them to Isaac, then to Clara, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No judge is going to take a woman's word over a man's. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Isaac, "you'll regret sticking your nose in my business." With that, he yanked his horse's reins and turned the animal roughly, spurring it back down the path toward town. Clara stood trembling as she watched him go, the laundry forgotten. Isaac approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Clara nodded, though she felt anything but all right. "I knew he might come eventually," she said. "He's never been one to let go of what he considers his." Isaac's expression darkened. "You're not his, Clara. You never were." "I know that now," she replied, meeting his gaze. But Robert doesn't see people, he sees possessions. And he doesn't like losing what he thinks belongs to him. He won't bother you again, Isaac promised. I'll make sure of it. Clara managed a weak smile. Thank you, but I've learned not to underestimate him. Robert can be persistent when he wants something. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'll be vigilant. In the meantime, the divorce proceedings are underway. Soon you'll be legally free of him. That night, Clara lay awake, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Robert's threat echoed in her thoughts, along with the memory of Isaac standing protectively between them. No man had ever defended her that way before, not her father, certainly not her husband. It was a novel feeling, being valued enough to be protected. But along with gratitude came worry. She didn't want to bring trouble to Isaac's door. He had been nothing but kind to her, offering her sanctuary when she needed it most. The last thing she wanted was to repay his generosity by entangling him in her problems. Perhaps she thought it would be better if she left. She had saved most of her wages over the past few weeks. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to take her someplace where Robert couldn't find her, Denver, or even farther east. The thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang of sadness. In just a short time, the Tucker Ranch had begun to feel like home in a way that nowhere had since her parents' farm. And Isaac. Clara found herself thinking of him more often than was proper for an employee to think of her employer. His quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, these thoughts occupied her mind during the day and followed her into dreams at night. Morning brought clarity, and Clara decided that running away would solve nothing. Robert would only see it as a victory, proof that he still held power over her. No, she would stay and see the divorce through. She would face whatever came and perhaps, in time, build a new life for herself, one of her own choosing. The days that followed were tense, with everyone at the ranch on alert for Robert's return. Isaac insisted that Clara not work alone outside, and Thomas's wife, Maria, came to help with the laundry and garden work so Clara wouldn't be vulnerable. A week passed with no sign of Robert. Then, too, Clara began to hope that perhaps his threats had been empty, fueled by alcohol and wounded pride rather than genuine intent. One afternoon, Isaac found Clara in the kitchen, kneading dough for the evening's bread. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work for a moment before speaking. I'm heading into town, he announced. Need to see about some supplies and check on the progress of your divorce papers. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get away from the ranch for a bit. Clara considered the offer. She hadn't left the property since Robert's visit, partly out of caution and partly because she'd had no reason to. But the thought of a change of scenery was appealing. Yes, I think I would like that, she decided, brushing flour from her hands. Give me a few minutes to change? Half an hour later, they were in Isaac's wagon, traveling the now familiar road toward Willow Creek. Clara wore her best dress, a modest green calico that complemented her eyes, and a bonnet to shield her from the late summer sun. You look nice, Isaac commented as they set out, his compliment causing a warmth to spread through Clara that had nothing to do with the weather. Thank you, she replied, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. It feels good to dress like a proper lady again. Isaac's expression softened. You've always been a proper lady, Clara. Clothes don't make the person. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. In the weeks she had known him, Isaac had consistently treated her with a respect that had been sorely lacking in her marriage. He valued her opinions, appreciated her contributions, and never made her feel less than his equal, despite her position as his employee. Willow Creek was bustling with activity when they arrived. Miners from the nearby hills, ranchers from the surrounding countryside, and the town's growing population of permanent residents filled the streets. Isaac helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I need to see Mr. Peterson at the mercantile," Isaac explained. "Then we can visit Judge Wallace about your papers. Would you like to look around the shops while I take care of business?" Clara hesitated. The idea of wandering alone made her nervous, despite the crowded streets. "I think I'd prefer to accompany you if you don't mind." Understanding flashed in Isaac's eyes. "Of course, I'd welcome the company." They headed first to the mercantile, where Isaac ordered supplies for the ranch. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, greeted Clara warmly, remembering her from previous visits with Mrs. Collins. "Heard about your situation, Mrs. Kennedy," he said in a lowered voice as Isaac spoke with the clerk about an order of fencing wire. "Terrible business. But you landed on your feet with Mr. Tucker. He's one of the good ones." Clara smiled, appreciating the older man's kindness. "Yes, I've been very fortunate." As they left the store, Isaac offered his arm, which Clara accepted gratefully. The simple gesture of walking arm in arm down the main street felt both proper and strangely intimate. Their next stop was the judge's office, a small building near the courthouse. Judge Wallace, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes and a perpetually stern expression, received them in his cluttered office. "Mrs. Kennedy, Mr. Tucker," he greeted them, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "I was planning to send word out to the ranch tomorrow. I've received the response to your divorce petition." Clara's heart raced. "From Robert?" The judge nodded, retrieving a document from a stack of papers. "Mr. Kennedy has contested the divorce," he said, his tone regretful. "Claims abandonment on your part. Says you left the marital home without cause." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "That's a lie. He sold me." "I know, Mrs. Kennedy," Judge Wallace interrupted gently, "and I believe you, but the law requires me to consider both petitions. There will need to be a hearing." Isaac leaned forward. "When?" "2 weeks from today," the judge replied. "Mrs. Kennedy will need to testify, and I've summoned witnesses who were present at the incident in question." Clara felt a mixture of dread and determination. The thought of facing Robert in a public hearing was terrifying, but if it was what she needed to do to secure her freedom, she would do it. "Thank you, Judge Wallace," she said, rising from her chair. "I'll be ready." Outside, Isaac placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Clara nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "I should have known Robert wouldn't make this easy. He never does." "You won't face him alone," Isaac assured her. "I'll be there, and so will others who saw what happened. The truth will come out." They completed their errands in thoughtful silence, each preoccupied with the upcoming hearing. As they prepared to leave town, Isaac suggested they stop for lunch at the hotel dining room, a modest establishment that served decent food. "It would be nice to eat a meal I didn't have to cook myself," Clara admitted with a small smile. The dining room was quiet, with only a few other patrons scattered at tables around the room. Isaac and Clara were shown to a corner table, where they ordered stew and fresh bread. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the divorce is final?" Isaac asked as they waited for their food. "You mentioned teaching." Clara considered the question. "I'm not sure Willow Creek is ready for a divorced woman teaching their children," she said realistically. "But perhaps in a larger town, or a city where no one knows my history." "You shouldn't have to hide your past," Isaac said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong." "The world doesn't always see it that way," Clara replied. "Especially for women." Isaac frowned, acknowledging the truth in her words. "What if you stayed at the ranch?" he suggested after a moment. "Not just as a housekeeper, but, well, there's good land that could be developed. You could have a place of your own, if that's what you want." Clara was touched by the offer, though she sensed there was more to it than Isaac was saying. "That's very generous." "It's not generosity," Isaac said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It's whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the arrival of their food. The moment passed, but Clara found herself wondering what might have followed. Was it possible that Isaac's feelings for her had grown beyond those of an employer for his housekeeper? The thought sent a flutter of anticipation through her chest. They ate, their conversation turning to lighter topics: the upcoming harvest festival, the new schoolhouse being built on the edge of town, the foal expected from one of Isaac's prized mares. By the time they finished their meal, Clara felt more relaxed than she had since learning of Robert's challenge to the divorce. As they left the hotel, however, her newfound peace was shattered by a familiar voice calling her name. Robert emerged from the saloon across the street, flanked by two men Clara didn't recognize. His gait was unsteady as he crossed toward them, his expression a mixture of anger and what he probably imagined was charm. "There's my runaway wife," he announced loudly enough for passers-by to hear. "Thought you could hide from me, didn't you?" Isaac stepped partially in front of Clara, his posture tense but controlled. "Kennedy, this isn't the time or place." Robert ignored him, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Clara. "Come home, Clara. I forgive you for leaving. We can start fresh." The audacity of his forgiveness, after what he'd done, stirred Clara's anger. "There is no home to return to, Robert. You lost it gambling, remember? Just like you lost everything else." Robert's face darkened. "Don't talk back to me, woman. You're still my wife." "Not for long," Clara replied, finding strength in Isaac's steady presence beside her. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. After that, I'll never have to see you again." Robert lunged forward suddenly, grabbing for Clara's arm. "You're coming with me now." Before he could reach her, Isaac's fist connected with Robert's jaw, sending him stumbling backward into his companions. The impact was controlled but effective, delivered with the precision of a man who knew his own strength. "Touch her again and you'll regret it," Isaac warned, his voice dangerously quiet. Robert wiped blood from his split lip, his eyes narrowing with malice. "Big man, hitting someone smaller than you. Wonder how brave you'd be if it was a fair fight." "There's nothing fair about a man who sells his wife to pay his debts," Isaac replied evenly. A small crowd had gathered, attracted by the confrontation. Among them, Clara spotted Sheriff Donovan making his way toward them, his expression grim. "What's the trouble here?" he demanded, looking from Robert to Isaac. "This man assaulted me, Sheriff," Robert declared, pointing at Isaac. "Unprovoked attack." Several voices from the crowd contradicted him immediately. "That's not how it happened, Sheriff. Kennedy tried to grab the lady first. Tucker was just protecting Mrs. Kennedy." The sheriff sighed, clearly familiar with Robert's reputation. "Kennedy, I think you'd better move along. Go sleep it off." Robert glared, but even in his intoxicated state, he knew better than to argue with the law. "This isn't over," he muttered before allowing his friends to lead him back toward the saloon. The sheriff turned to Clara and Isaac. "You folks all right?" Clara nodded, though her heart was still racing. "Yes, thank you, Sheriff. You might want to head back to the ranch," he advised. "Kennedy's been in town 3 days now, drinking heavily and telling anyone who'll listen that he's going to reclaim his wife. I've warned him about causing trouble, but he doesn't listen to warnings," Clara finished, all too familiar with Robert's stubbornness. Isaac placed a protective hand on the small of Clara's back. "We were just leaving, Sheriff." "Thank you." The ride back to the ranch was subdued, both Clara and Isaac lost in their own thoughts. The confrontation in town had cast a shadow over what had started as a pleasant day. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally, breaking the silence. Isaac glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. For what? For bringing all this trouble into your life, she explained. You offered me kindness, and in return, you've been dragged into my problems. Isaac's expression softened. Clara, you have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault. But if I hadn't come to the ranch, if you hadn't come to the ranch, Isaac interrupted gently, I'd still be eating burnt beans and living in a house covered in dust. You've brought far more good than trouble. His words eased some of Clara's guilt, but not her worry. What if he comes back? What if he tries something worse next time? Isaac's jaw set determinedly. Then we'll deal with it. Together. The word together held a promise that warmed Clara despite her fears. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. That evening, after supper had been cleared away, Isaac invited Clara to join him on the porch. The night was clear, with a crescent moon hanging above the distant mountains and a blanket of stars stretching across the sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and the sweet fragrance of late summer wildflowers. I've been thinking, Isaac began, his voice quiet in the darkness. That sounds ominous, Clara teased, trying to lighten the mood that had been somber since their return from town. Isaac smiled, the moonlight casting shadows across his features. Nothing ominous, I promise. I was just thinking about what happens after your divorce. Clara's heart quickened. Oh, I meant what I said about you staying here, he continued. But I realize now I wasn't entirely clear about my meaning. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but gentle. Clara, in the short time you've been here, you've become important to me, more than I expected, more than might be proper, given our arrangement. Clara held her breath, hardly daring to hope that his words might lead where she thought they might. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, Isaac went on, is that I care for you, not as an employer cares for a housekeeper, but as a man cares for a woman he admires and respects. I know your experience with marriage has been difficult, and I would never presume to rush you into anything. But I wanted you to know that when I offered you a place here, it wasn't just out of kindness or duty. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of a different sort than those she had shed so often in recent months. Isaac, she whispered, her voice catching, I care for you too, more than I thought possible after everything that happened. Relief washed over his features, followed by a tender smile. You do. Yes, Clara admitted, surprising herself with her boldness. You've shown me what a good man truly is: kind, honorable, respectful. You've given me hope that perhaps I could find happiness again someday. Isaac reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently took her hand in his. I'd like to be the one to bring you that happiness, Clara. When you're ready, when you're truly free. Clara looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. I'd like that too, she said softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the stars. No declarations of love were made. No promises beyond the unspoken understanding that they would face whatever came next side by side. For Clara, it was enough, more than enough, after years of broken promises and harsh words. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Clara met with Judge Wallace again to review her testimony, gathering her courage for the hearing that would determine her future. Isaac accompanied her to town for these meetings, his steady presence a reminder that she was no longer facing life's challenges alone. At the ranch, their relationship remained outwardly proper employer and housekeeper to all appearances. But in the quiet moments, shared glances across the dinner table, conversations that stretched late into the evening, the brush of fingers when passing a cup of coffee, something deeper was growing. Isaac was careful not to rush her, understanding that she needed time to heal from the wounds of her marriage to Robert. His patience only endeared him to her more. The night before the hearing, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She paced her room, rehearsing what she would say to the judge, imagining Robert's accusations and her responses. The stakes felt impossibly high. If the judge ruled in Robert's favor, she could be legally compelled to return to him. The thought made her physically ill. A soft knock at her door startled her from these dark thoughts. She opened it to find Isaac standing in the hallway, a concerned expression on his face. "I saw the light under your door," he explained. "Thought you might be having trouble sleeping." "I can't stop thinking about tomorrow," Clara admitted. "What if—" "Don't," Isaac interrupted gently. "Don't torture yourself with what-ifs. The truth is on your side, Clara. And so are a dozen witnesses who saw what happened that night. Robert can be persuasive when he wants to be," she warned. "And he's a man. His word carries weight that mine doesn't." Isaac frowned, acknowledging the unfairness of this reality. "Judge Wallace is fair-minded. He'll listen to all the evidence before making his decision." Clara nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. "I know. I can't go back to that life, Isaac. I can't." "You won't have to," Isaac promised, his voice firm with conviction. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I won't let him take you." The intensity of his declaration startled her. "What do you mean?" Isaac ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly abashed. "I mean that if the worst happens, if the judge somehow rules in Robert's favor, we'll find another way. We could leave, go somewhere he couldn't find you. Denver, San Francisco, even back east if necessary." The offer left Clara speechless. That he would consider uprooting his life, leaving the ranch he had built with years of hard work, for her sake was overwhelming. "You would do that?" she asked when she found her voice. "Leave everything you've built here?" "In a heartbeat," Isaac replied without hesitation. "The ranch is just land and buildings, Clara. Can be replaced. You can't." Tears welled in her eyes at his words. Without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. Isaac froze for a moment in surprise before gently returning the hug, his strong arms encircling her with a tenderness that made her feel both protected and cherished. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. They stood like that for a long moment before Clara reluctantly stepped back, aware of the impropriety of their position in the darkened hallway outside her bedroom. Isaac seemed to realize it too, clearing his throat as he took a small step back. "Try to get some rest," he advised. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough without adding exhaustion." Clara nodded. "I'll try." "Good night, Clara," he said softly, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer. "Good night, Isaac." As she closed the door, Clara felt a curious mix of emotions, anxiety about the hearing still, but now tempered by a warm certainty that whatever happened, she wouldn't face it alone. She returned to her bed and, to her surprise, fell asleep within minutes, her dreams free of the nightmares that had plagued her for so long. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself refused to acknowledge the gravity of what lay ahead. Clara dressed with care in her best dress, the green calico that Isaac had complimented. She pinned her hair in a neat chignon and added her mother's cameo brooch, one of the few possessions Robert hadn't gambled away, to her collar. Isaac was waiting in the kitchen, dressed in what Clara recognized as his church clothes. A clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His usual hat was replaced by a more formal one, and his boots were polished to a shine. He looked every inch the respected rancher he was, and Clara felt a surge of gratitude that he would be beside her today. "You look lovely," he said when he saw her, his eyes warm with admiration. "Thank you," Clara replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "I want to make a good impression on the judge." "You will," Isaac assured her, offering a cup of coffee. "Drink this. It might be a long day." They rode to town in Isaac's wagon, the journey passing mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Willow Creek, Clara's anxiety increased. The courthouse loomed ahead, a two-story wooden structure that served as the center of legal proceedings for the county. Already a small crowd had gathered, news of the hearing having spread through the town's efficient gossip network. Clara felt eyes on her as Isaac helped her down from the wagon, whispers following them as they made their way up the steps. Inside, the courtroom was arranged simply a raised platform where the judge would sit, a witness stand to one side, and rows of benches for spectators. Clara and Isaac took seats in the front row. A few minutes later, Robert entered with a man Clara recognized as Philip Harrington, a lawyer known for taking cases others wouldn't touch. Robert looked more presentable than she had seen him in months, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that must have been borrowed, his hair neatly combed. Only the lingering puffiness around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his continuing indulgence in alcohol. He caught her gaze and smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Clara quickly looked away, focusing instead on Judge Wallace as he entered the courtroom, his black robes lending him an air of solemn authority. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced. "The matter of Kennedy versus Kennedy, petition for divorce." The proceedings began formally, with Judge Wallace explaining the purpose of the hearing and the standards by which he would make his determination. Robert's lawyer spoke first, presenting his client's case that Clara had abandoned the marriage without cause, that she had taken up residence with another man, implying impropriety without stating it directly. Clara listened, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as Robert took the stand and painted a picture of himself as a devoted husband whose wife had run off at the first sign of financial difficulty. It was so far from the truth that it would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. When it was Clara's turn to present her case, she approached the witness stand with trembling legs but a straight back. She had no lawyer, she couldn't afford one, but Judge Wallace had assured her that she could speak for herself. "Mrs. Kennedy," the judge began kindly, "please tell the court in your own words why you are seeking this divorce." Clara took a deep breath and began to speak. She told of her marriage to Robert, how it had begun with hope but quickly descended into a nightmare of drinking, gambling, and eventually verbal and physical abuse. She described the night at the saloon when Robert had offered her as payment for his debts, the humiliation of being bid on like cattle, and Isaac's intervention. "Mr. Tucker did not buy me," she clarified, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He bought my freedom. He offered me employment as his housekeeper, with fair wages and my own room. He has been a perfect gentleman, never once overstepping the boundaries of propriety." "Objection," Robert's lawyer called. "This is hearsay. We have only Mrs. Kennedy's word for what transpired that night." "Actually," Judge Wallace replied, "we do not. I have statements from several witnesses who were present, including Sheriff Donovan and Mr. Peterson from the Mercantile. They corroborate Mrs. Kennedy's account." Robert leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer, his face flushing with anger. The lawyer shook his head, clearly advising restraint. "Mrs. Kennedy," the judge continued, "has your husband ever threatened you with physical harm?" "Yes, Your Honor," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "On multiple occasions. The last time was 2 weeks ago, here in town, when he attempted to force me to go with him. Mr. Tucker intervened then as well." "I see," the judge said, making a note. "And prior to the incident at the saloon, had Mr. Kennedy ever abandoned you or failed to provide for your basic needs?" "Yes, Your Honor. There were many times when he gambled away our rent money or food money. I often went hungry because there was nothing in the house to eat, and he would disappear for days at a time on gambling sprees. The questions continued, with Clara answering each one honestly and directly. She felt Isaac's supportive gaze from the audience, drawing strength from his presence. When she was finally allowed to step down, her legs were shaky but her mind was clear. She had told the truth, and now it was in the judge's hands. After hearing testimony from several witnesses, including the sheriff and Mr. Peterson, Judge Wallace called a brief recess to consider his decision. Clara and Isaac stepped outside for fresh air, finding a quiet spot away from curious onlookers. "You did well," Isaac told her, pride evident in his voice. "You spoke with dignity and honesty." "I just told the truth," Clara replied. "I only hope it's enough." Isaac squeezed her hand reassuringly. "The judge is fair. He won't send you back to a man who treated you so poorly." When court reconvened, the room was hushed with anticipation. Judge Wallace's expression was grave as he took his seat. "I have carefully considered the testimony presented today," he began. "Divorce is a serious matter, not to be granted lightly. However, the evidence in this case is compelling. Mr. Kennedy's behavior, particularly the incident in which he attempted to sell his wife to cover gambling debts, constitutes extreme cruelty and abandonment under the law." Clara held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the petition for divorce is granted. Mrs. Kennedy is hereby released from the bonds of matrimony and may resume her maiden name if she so chooses. Furthermore, given the nature of Mr. Kennedy's actions, Mrs. Kennedy is awarded full ownership of any personal belongings currently in her possession." Relief washed over Clara in a dizzying wave. Free. She was free. As to the matter of alimony, the judge continued, "Given that Mr. Kennedy appears to have no stable means of support and Mrs. Kennedy is self-supporting through her employment, no alimony is awarded to either party." Robert leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "Mr. Kennedy," Judge Wallace interrupted sharply. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. The court's decision is final." Robert glared, his fists clenched at his sides, before storming out of the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying after him. Clara watched him go, feeling not triumph but a profound sense of relief and finality. A chapter of her life had closed, and a new one was beginning. Outside the courthouse, well-wishers surrounded Clara, offering congratulations and support. Many of the townspeople had witnessed Robert's behavior over the years and were pleased to see Clara freed from his control. Sheriff Donovan approached, his expression serious. "Mrs. Kennedy, or should I say Miss Walker now?" he began, using Clara's maiden name. "Clara is fine," she replied with a smile. "Clara, then. I wanted to warn you Robert didn't take that ruling well. He was making threats as he left. Might be best if you stay out at the ranch for a while, at least until he cools down or moves on." Isaac, who had been standing protectively at Clara's side, nodded grimly. "We'll be careful, Sheriff. Thank you for the warning." As they prepared to leave town, Clara felt lighter than she had in years, despite the sheriff's warning. The weight of her marriage to Robert had been lifted, leaving her free to choose her own path forward. "What would you like to do now?" Isaac asked as he helped her into the wagon. "We could have lunch at the hotel to celebrate?" Clara considered the offer, but the memory of their last encounter with Robert at the hotel made her hesitate. "Would you mind terribly if we just went home? I think I'd prefer a quiet celebration." Isaac smiled at her use of the word home, a smile that reached his eyes and warmed Clara from the inside out. "Home it is," he agreed, taking up the reins. The ride back to the ranch was markedly different from their journey into town that morning. Where before they had been tense and preoccupied, now conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by smiles and occasional laughter. Clara felt as though she could finally breathe fully, without the constricting fear that had been her constant companion for so long. "I was thinking," Isaac said as the ranch came into view, "now that your divorce is final, perhaps we could reconsider your position here." Clara glanced at him, suddenly uncertain. "Oh, are you dissatisfied with my work?" "Quite the opposite," Isaac assured her quickly. "Your work has been exemplary, but I thought perhaps you might prefer a different arrangement, one that would allow you more independence." Curiosity replaced Clara's momentary concern. "What did you have in mind?" "The east section of the ranch has good water access and fertile soil," Isaac explained. "I've been thinking of developing it for some time but haven't had the chance. If you're interested, it could be yours to manage either as a garden plot for selling produce in town, or perhaps for raising chickens or dairy cows. Whatever you prefer. You'd keep the profits, of course." The offer stunned Clara. "Isaac, that's incredibly generous. But I don't know the first thing about running my own business." "You're a quick learner," he replied confidently, "and I'd be happy to teach you what I know. The point is, Clara, you should have something that's truly yours, something no one can take from you." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll consider it," Isaac suggested, bringing the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "There's no rush to decide. And of course, you're welcome to stay on as housekeeper if that's what you prefer." As Clara prepared a special supper that evening, roast chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, she considered Isaac's proposal. The idea of having her own piece of land, her own small business, was both exhilarating and intimidating. But the more she thought about it, the more appealing it became. It would mean security and independence of a sort she had never known. They ate by lamplight, the mood celebratory despite the simplicity of their surroundings. Isaac had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted Clara's newfound freedom. "To new beginnings," Isaac said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Clara echoed, her eyes meeting his across the table. After they had cleared away the dishes, Isaac suggested they move to the porch to enjoy the mild evening air. The night was clear, with a nearly full moon casting silver light over the ranch. They sat side by side in the wooden rocking chairs that had become their customary spots for evening conversations. "I've been thinking about your offer," Clara began, breaking a comfortable silence. "And," Isaac prompted gently, "I'd like to accept," she decided. "The idea of having something of my own. It means more than I can say." Isaac's smile was warm in the moonlight. "I'm glad. We can ride out tomorrow to look at the land if you'd like. Start making plans." Clara nodded, excitement building at the prospect. But there was something else on her mind, something that had been growing clearer throughout the day. "Isaac," she said, her heart racing, "there's something else I need to tell you." He turned to face her more fully, his expression open and attentive. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When the judge granted my divorce today, he mentioned that I could resume my maiden name if I wished. But I've been thinking. Perhaps there's another name I might take instead." Isaac went very still, his eyes never leaving hers. "Clara," he breathed, her name a question and a hope in one. "I care for you, Isaac," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "More than I thought possible after everything that happened with Robert. These past weeks, you've shown me what a good man truly is. What a marriage should be, a partnership built on respect and kindness and love." The word hung between them, charged with meaning. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Isaac asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara smiled, feeling both vulnerable and strangely brave. "I'm saying that if you asked me, my answer would be yes." In one fluid movement, Isaac was kneeling before her chair, taking her hands in his. Clara Walker, he said, his eyes shining in the moonlight. I've fallen in love with you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, everything about you. I know it's soon, and I would wait as long as you needed, but if you're sure, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy filled Clara's eyes as she squeezed his hands. Yes, Isaac. Yes, I will marry you. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. For the first time, their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness and promise of their newly declared love. When they finally parted, both were smiling, their foreheads touching as they savored the moment. I never thought I could be this happy again, Clara whispered. This is just the beginning, Isaac promised. We have a lifetime ahead of us. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town church, with only a few close friends in attendance. Clara wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Isaac had insisted on buying for her, despite her protests that it was too extravagant. Judge Wallace officiated, his usually stern face softened by a genuine smile as he pronounced them husband and wife. The news of their marriage spread quickly through Willow Creek and the surrounding countryside. Most reactions were positive. The townspeople had always respected Isaac, and Clara had earned their sympathy and admiration through her dignified handling of the divorce proceedings. There were a few raised eyebrows at the speed of the union following so closely on the heels of Clara's divorce, but these were largely silenced by the obvious devotion between the newlyweds. Of Robert there was no sign. Sheriff Donovan reported that he had left town the day after the divorce hearing, reportedly heading west toward the mining camps in the mountains. Clara prayed that he had finally accepted defeat and would leave them in peace. Life at the Tucker Ranch. Now their ranch settled into a new rhythm. Clara continued to manage the household, but now as its mistress rather than its housekeeper. Isaac helped her develop the east section of the property, building a chicken coop and fencing a garden plot where she began growing vegetables for sale in town. To Clara's surprise, her small enterprise flourished. Her produce fresh lettuce, tomatoes, carrots, and beans was in high demand in Willow Creek, where fresh vegetables were a luxury. By the end of the summer, she had established a loyal customer base and was turning a tidy profit. You have a gift for growing things? Isaac told her one evening as they walked together through her thriving garden. Everything you touch seems to flourish. Clara smiled, leaning into his embrace. It's not just me. This land is rich and you've taught me well. We make a good team, Isaac replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The best, Clara agreed, her heart full. As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the golden hues of changing leaves, Clara began to suspect that their family might soon grow by one. The signs were subtle at first: a lingering tiredness, sensitivity to certain foods, a slight fullness to her figure, but by the time the first frost touched the valley, she was certain. She shared the news with Isaac on a chilly evening as they sat by the fire after supper. His reaction was everything she had hoped for: joy, wonder, and a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. A baby, he whispered, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Clara covered his hand with her own, smiling through her tears. Our baby, she confirmed. Due in late spring, I think. Isaac gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, Clara Tucker. You've made me the happiest man alive. And you've given me a life I never dared to dream of, she replied, nestling against his chest. A home, a purpose, a future, and now a family. The winter passed in a blur of preparations. Isaac added a nursery to their home, converting one of the spare bedrooms with his own hands. Clara sewed tiny garments and blankets in the evenings, her heart swelling with each small stitch. They discussed names, shared hopes for the child's future, and marveled at the miracle growing within Clara's expanding belly. Spring brought renewal to the land and anticipation to the Tucker household. The ranch thrived under their joint management, with the cattle herd growing and Clara's garden producing its first tender shoots. In late April, as the wildflowers began to carpet the hills surrounding the valley, their son was born. They named him James, after Isaac's father, and Samuel after Clara's. He arrived after a long but uncomplicated labor, with the assistance of the midwife from town and Isaac's steady presence throughout. The moment he was placed in Clara's arms, tiny and perfect with a dusting of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, she felt a love unlike any she had ever known. "He's beautiful," Isaac whispered, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their newborn son. "Just like his mother." Clara smiled tiredly, leaning against her husband's strength. "He has your eyes," she observed. "And your chin, I think." "Poor boy," Isaac joked, earning a soft laugh from Clara. "He's perfect," she corrected. "Absolutely perfect." As the seasons turned and little James grew from infant to toddler, Clara often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this life. The pain and humiliation of her first marriage had led her, by a twisted path, to a joy she never could have imagined. Where once she had known fear and despair, now she knew love and security. Where once she had been property to be sold, now she was a partner valued and cherished. One summer evening, 3 years after their marriage, Clara and Isaac sat on their porch, watching 2-year-old James chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. His delighted giggles filled the air as he ran on sturdy legs, arms outstretched toward the glowing insects. "Careful, James," Clara called as he ventured toward the edge of the porch. "Stay where Mama can see you." The boy turned, his face alight with joy. "Look, Mama, I caught one," he exclaimed, holding his cupped hands toward her. "Gently now," Isaac advised, rising to kneel beside his son. "Remember what I told you about being gentle with small creatures." James nodded solemnly, carefully opening his hands to reveal the tiny glowing insect. It rested there for a moment before taking flight, rising into the darkening sky to join its brethren. James watched it go with wonder. "It's free now," he announced proudly. Clara met Isaac's gaze over their son's head, a shared understanding passing between them. Freedom to choose one's path, to love, to build a life of one's own making was the greatest gift of all. "Yes, sweetheart," she agreed, drawing James onto her lap. "And that's exactly as it should be." Isaac settled beside them, his arm encircling them both. "Freedom is precious," he said. His words meant as much for Clara as for their son. "That's why we must always protect it for ourselves and for others." Clara leaned against him, contentment washing over her as the first stars appeared in the velvet sky above their home. From the ashes of her past, a new life had risen, one built on love, respect, and the freedom to become the person she was meant to be. In Isaac's arms, with their son between them and another child growing beneath her heart, Clara knew that she had found not just freedom, but true happiness. As the fireflies danced in the gathering darkness, Clara silently thanked the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment, this man, this child, this life. Her journey had begun in despair when her husband sold her to cover his debts, but it had led to redemption when a kind-hearted cowboy declared, "I'm buying your freedom." And in that freedom, she had found everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream.